time. Hello, and welcome to Into the Liminal Abyss Paranormal Podcast. I am your host, Shatan Noir, and this week my guest is Mr. Christopher O'Brien, the author of Stalking the Herd. Chris, could you please tell me more about your background?
Well, I'm a musician and pretty much consider myself an investigative journalist, for lack of a better term. And I've got a pretty varied background, mostly in music. I lived in New York for many years, through the mid to late 70s to the 80s, and was a keyboard player, was in several bands and did some session work, and was hired by a band in Boston in '87. So I ended up moving up there for a couple of years, and I really got disillusioned with the music scene at that point. Not so much the music scene, but the music business. The bad lawyers and worse managers. And I went ahead and decided to move back out west, where I'd grown up. I grew up in the Seattle, Washington area in Belgium, and then went to New York out of high school. But I kind of missed being out with the wide open spaces, and so I ended up moving down to southern Colorado, to the San Luis Valley, which, as I found out, is quite a interesting place and has all sorts of head-scratching things going on there. So I was kind of out of the pan into the fire, as it was.
Now, how did you become interested in the UFOs, the cattle mutilation, crypto creatures? What started your interest and your research into those subjects?
Well, I've always been interested in the subject. I had an inexplicable experience when I was 7 years old. I was visited by non-human entities in my bedroom at the middle of the night, back when I was just a little shaver, and because it didn't really leave any interpretation that I could make other than that I was being visited by non-human entities, that changed my reality view drastically, and so from that point on, I always knew there was something going on that we weren't learning about in our schools and our churches and from our parents and from science, and so that always that's been the linchpin really of everything that I've done since. I've been extremely interested in these subjects ever since a very young age, and so I would devour every book I could find to read, and love Star Trek, when it came out, and just generally always had my eyes and ears open to find out more about what I could have experienced. And so this kind of faded away a little bit, this interest, when I was in New York City, because I was in the center of Manhattan, and you can't even see the sky, let alone do any sky watching, really. So, plus bringing up these subjects in polite social situations wouldn't endear you to people.
Right.
People kind of look at you a little sideways. Back in the 70s and 80s, it was a little different than it is now. But when I moved to the San Luis Valley, I knew that this place had a history of unusual events, but I thought all that was, just that, history. I didn't think that there was stuff still going on. And within the first year I was there, I had a couple of interesting experiences that I couldn't explain, seeing strange aerial objects that I kind of describe as like cheap fireworks, or they look like large bottle rockets that fizzle out and they arc over you. They're not shooting stars. They don't have any real, you can't really tell what's causing them. They seem to be some sort of natural phenomenon, but as yet undefined. And so seeing these things a couple times, hearing about UFO sightings that people had in the area, Actually having a couple myself of structured craft, I realized that there were still things going on there in that part of Colorado. And the San Luis Valley is a huge, the largest alpine valley in the world. It's about 140 miles long geographically, and totally ringed by mountains. The valley floor is at about 7,500 feet, so it's really high up in the air. I lived between 8,000 and 9,000 feet for almost 13 years. So it's like on the backbone of America, and that sort of environment doesn't really draw too many people because it's so high up in the air. And the valley only had about one person for every 7 square miles, so it's very sparsely populated, one of the most remote areas in the United States.
Wow.
60 miles from the nearest, hospital, supermarket, hardware store, that sort of thing. And so it was a little difficult getting established there and, finding work and being able to afford to live there. But after a couple of years of hearing stories and seeing a few things myself, I started to get the sense that maybe there was something here that needed to be looked into. And at one point, I held a New Year's Eve party, New Year's Eve 1992, and about a month before, there had been a huge sighting that I had missed. I was out gigging with my band, but a bunch of people in a little town, Crestone, where I lived, they'd seen these objects, and 200-foot glowing ovals that came down out of the mountains and then hovered over the town and shot off to the west and went to the south. And everywhere I went to the party a month later, I was hearing people talking about this sighting. So I thought, wow, this might be a great article for a local paper. I started writing and with the local cartoonist for our little paper. And so I went to the publisher and said, hey, I think I have a great idea for a story. She said, keep it to 500 words. I had a couple of weeks to work on it, and I started researching. And within a week, I knew I found enough stuff to probably write a book. That nobody had ever looked at this stuff in its totality and ever bothered to write everything down in one place. So that's basically when my investigative career started, January 1st, 1993, and within 2 months, I was on national TV. Go figure.
So now, is that how you got your start into being a field investigator also, or did that come later after you had started being an investigative journalist?
Well, they both came hand in hand. Of course, the first thing I wanted to do was find out if anybody had ever come to the valley and done some investigative work so that I could talk to them and get some feedback from them, possibly some pointers, how to go about, digging into all these things. And so very early on, I talked with Tom Adams and Gary Massey, who were two investigators from Texas that had come up to the valley since 1970 and were poking around trying to figure out what was going on. And then they told me to call David Perkins, who lived up and over the mountains from me, about 20 miles away, but to drive to his house took 3.5 hours because I had to go all around the mountain range, even though it was only 20 miles away. And, of course, Linda Howe, she had been coming to the area on and off for a number of years, and Wendell Stevens was another, Leo Sprinkle. So I found out about all these people, not knowing, really anything about them, and called them up, introduced myself, and said, hey, I'm in this place that you're familiar with. And they were all very excited because they all had been hoping for years that somebody would turn up in the valley that was interested enough to run around and do what I ended up doing. And they were all very excited about it because, it takes a local person really to get to the bottom of what's going on in a region. You can't really go in from the outside and expect, people that live there to open up and be real forthright with you concerning the types of things that they experience that they wouldn't normally talk about, that even among families sometimes. So to have a local there was really important for them in their work, and they were very, very helpful. And Linda was very gracious and taught me how to interview people correctly. And Tom Adams taught me how to log everything in an organized fashion. Tom Adams taught me how to think creatively and to analyze things in a creative, sort of out of the box sort of way. Leo Sprinkle gave me some insights in bedside manner, how to deal with people that have had traumatic experiences, and how to pull information from them, but make it so that it's not you're not having them relive some fearful events, let's say, or just basically just how to have a good bedside manner. And these are all some of the top people in the field. I was very, very, very fortunate to get a crash course within a few days, really, of how to do this. And then I, of course, developed my own style, but based on the insight and guidance of some real, I think, giants in the field. I stand on the shoulder of giants, as we all do in this field.
Wow, it sounds like you could maybe write a book on how to do field investigations into UFO sightings. And
yeah, I've had people mention that to me. I did co-write the Skywatchers International Investigator Manual. I've done training workshops, and at one point I was working on a training video for folks. But I think everybody really has to find their own sort of approach, their own system that works for them. There's really no one size fits all approach. Some regions take a different kind of approach than other regions. For instance, I wouldn't use my techniques of interviewing people and of going around and making inroads in the community. I wouldn't use my set of I guess investigator skills, if you were, like back here in on the East Coast. It wouldn't work. It would work, I think, kind of down south. I have a more of a slow, methodical way of doing things. For instance, just to give you an example, if I hear a story about somebody had an experience, but they didn't want anybody to know about it. They didn't want me to know about it because they were afraid that they'd get their name splashed all over the media and stuff, and they'd be embarrassed and whatever. So, let's say the guy's neighbor calls me, or his brother, or his wife, or something, and says, "Hey, so and so had a really, life-changing experience, and he doesn't really want to talk about it, but I figured you'd want to know." And so what I'd do is I'd call him up and say, "Hey, Mr. So-and-so, my name is Christopher O'Brien. I live here in the area." And, I was talking with someone and their name came up. And so I figured I'd call and introduce myself. "So how's your son's basketball team doing? What do you think of the price of beef? Man, this weather really we could sure use some rain." Or, I talk about anything except for why I called. And then I just say, "Well, it was good talking to you. I just wanted to call and introduce myself. See ya, bye." And I'd hang up. And then, a week or so go by, I'd call up again. "Hey, this is Chris. Remember me? I called last week. Really nice talking to you. By the way, do you know if they're going to put in that road near you that goes up into the mountains? How'd your kids do, at the basketball playoffs?" And I'd start in with the same routine. And generally, the second time I call, whoever it was would go, okay. And they tell me. One time it took 3 calls for someone to open up and volunteer the information without me ever asking for it. So there are ways to utilize, kind of journalistic techniques to get people to open up and feel comfortable with you. And a lot of it has to do with, obviously, with establishing some sort of rapport with the person and allowing them the leeway and the space to feel comfortable talking to you. I was the first investigator on the infamous Skinwalker Ranch case, for instance. I was asked by the writer of the article that exposed the case to call the rancher up that he could really use somebody to talk to. And so I called him up, and man, he just opened up like a waterfall. And so, he said, "Man, I sure wish you could come up here." And the next day, I did the 450 miles, and I drove up there. walked around his ranch, and he told me all these stories, and I didn't ask a single question. I just sat and listened because I thought it was the first of many talks that I'd have with the guy. And as it turns out, of course, Bigelow bought the ranch for the NIDS organization, and Terry got slapped with a non-disclosure agreement, so he couldn't talk to anybody. And so I never really was able to follow through with my, my patient approach, as I would like to refer to it. And so he couldn't really talk to me anymore. But I got a lot from him before he got muzzled. In fact, I was on the phone with him when one of the most famous events that occurred up there happened. He was giving me a blow-by-blow while we were on the phone. So that's, for people out there that want to get involved in this stuff and want to become investigators, people, when they have these types of experiences, generally are very uncomfortable, and they feel singled out, they feel vulnerable, they feel a sense of nervousness that they can't put their finger on. So you have to be very, very aware of that, and you can't just barge in and just start slapping people with questions. You have to work into it, and especially in a rural community with lots of farmers and ranchers and stuff like I lived in, it's really important to chew on the straw and just kind of sit back and talk about everything else and let them bring the subject up. I mean, that's ideally the best way to do it. So there are ways to skin a horse. Maybe bad analogy.
but kind of on topic for... Now, I know you had mentioned a few minutes ago, you had mentioned an organization that I hadn't heard of before, the Open Sky, was it? Or
it's the National Institute for Discovery Sciences.
Okay.
Skywatch.
Now, I know that there's a couple different organizations out there that investigate UFO and alien sightings. They also get a lot of reports on flying cryptids. Have you worked for any of those as an investigator, or are you just independent investigator?
Well, I moved on when I first was getting started. I think I was a member of September '93, and then I quit because they wanted all my information. But when I asked them for case files from cases that I was interested in researching and investigating, they said, "Well, we don't have a way to retrieve data." And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Well, all the reports are in boxes and in the head of MUFON's garage."
Oh my goodness!
They didn't get a digitized database until 2010, I think it's 2011. So this is back, 15, 20 years before that. So, I just wouldn't be a part of an organization that would have me as a member, first of all. But if there's no quid pro quo, if they're not going to help me with some of their cases that they'd already investigated to let me have access to them, why should I give them any more? It's like shining a flashlight into a black hole. You're not going to see anything. So I've never been a part of really any organization besides helping the guys in MUFON, Bill Hamilton and Steve Wilson, devise their manual. And they named me their chief investigator, but I kind of turned them down. I said, I don't want to be anybody's chief investigator. I've got enough to do on my own. So yeah, I kind of stay away from groups. I think the group mentality, it just gets too factious. People are too, kind of invested in their egos, and it's much easier to go on, go by yourself and do these things and not be beholden to somebody else's, rules and regulations and all this paperwork and all this stuff. I think it's important to document things, obviously, date, time, duration, name of the person, type of event, classification of event. I have a database that has 10 points of data that needs to be there for it to be entered into the database. So I think it's important to have that sort of quality information. But I don't think it's by accident that Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official investigation into UFOs, I don't think it's by accident that they should stop and fold and stop doing business, and then less than 6 months later, MUFON starts. It just little. I just feel more comfortable on my own.
Yeah, yeah. So, how many UFO sightings have you personally investigated?
Oh, geez. Claims of sightings. If you count people telling me stories, passing along sightings from their family, it would be in the thousands. If you talk about cases that are in my database, there's about 700.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
So now, have any of those investigations led to any really sound findings where you've found some really good evidence, or is it just hit or miss that they saw something and there's no way to verify anything?
Well, it depends. I mean, I've had a lot of cases that would be reported to me by one person, and then come to find out that, once I start digging, I find, in some cases, many other witnesses to the same event. I've had corroborating accounts like that. That's fairly common. It's really big skies out there. Some of the darkest, nighttime skies in America. Being so high up in the air, there's less atmosphere. You can see the Milky Way directly from the ground, horizon to horizon. It's pretty impressive up there. So when something happens, especially out in the valley, there's nothing to obstruct your view. So many people can have a sighting of the same event. In terms of getting to the bottom of stuff, the only thing that I've been able to determine with a fair amount of certainty is some sightings that were deemed by the witness to be UFO-like or strange or unconventional, and then come to find out that it was actually the military lighting up planes in an unusual way. In one case, helicopters towing what appeared to be a magnetometer below that was lit up on another case. So the only real, I haven't found a spaceship and had somebody report to me that it said made in Zeta Reticuli on it.
Okay.
So, it's, if that was the case, I'd probably have a New York Times best-selling book if I was able to figure out where any of it came from. Or basically, what I'm doing is I'm logging the data and looking for patterns so that I can figure out where's the spots that you're more likely to see, something, and looking for patterns of frequency, days of the week, times of the day, that sort of thing, because I have done that. And what we're now doing is we're putting up a complete sensory data gathering project that has cameras, recording magnetometers, an accelerometer, a gravitometer, to record events, actual events of aerial objects, and then be able to triangulate on them with, 2 other cameras. So we have the software all designed to coordinate all the cameras and to zoom in and with GPS ID exactly where they are so that we can get, altitude, speed, size, azimuth, energy expenditure. These are types of scientific data that could come in handy if we could do this and then duplicate it and have another sighting that was similar and get the same information. Then we'd be able to hand it off to a physicist or an optical physicist or some other scientific discipline based on what we want to find out. We'd have the data to do that. So it's called UFODAP, UFODAP, which stands for Data Acquisition Project. we're going to be putting up these triangulated systems all over the country, and then eventually, if we can get away with sending the software overseas, since it is targeting software, that might be a little difficult.
Yeah.
But we want to have these systems set up in hotspot areas around the world. We've got our first test set up going up in the San Luis Valley. We have 2 cameras there. We're going to do the third this summer. We have a camera right up on the cliff above San Pedro, California, looking at the Catalina Island corridor. We're looking at a spot up by Trout Lake, Mount Adams. We have interest from Italy, Australia, Switzerland, Germany, and all over the United States. We're putting out price sheets for packages of cameras and our MSDAU units, which are a multi-sensor data acquisition unit, MSDAU, which has the components for the recording magnetometer, recording gravitometer, and accelerometers, and temperature, humidity, wind speed, the same package that they have inside the International Space Station. We're going to have that to record all the atmospheric conditions at the time of the sighting event. And of course, if something happens, automatically goes into record mode, cameras swing around, all 3 cameras point at the same event, closest camera zooms in, and we track it on Google Maps with a GPS unit.
Oh, that sounds really cool.
All this is automatic. It's all turnkey. I could operate the system from China if I wanted to.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, it is. Go to ufodap.com. Everything's there. We're going to be putting our price sheets and our packages. We're doing this at cost so that people can afford to, for as little as $400 or $500, have their own scientific, triangulated sighting, data acquisition equipment. It's pretty exciting now that the technology, has become, as proficient as it's become, and the cost has come down for cameras and sensors. What would have cost me $1 million 20 years ago, now we can do for less than $1,000.
So it seems like you do a lot of research into the cases and the location history when you're looking into reports. Now, when you go into a location, do you like to go in knowing like the whole background history, or do you want to discover stuff on your own? I know with like paranormal investigators, it's kind of 50-50. Some of them want to know the history, but some of them don't, so that when they do have an encounter, then they compare it, they go talk to, a historian and find out the information of the location.
Well, if I'm using, let's say I'm doing haunted site investigations and I want to know something about a particular spot, I'm going to be fully up to speed on it. Somebody has to be. So I'm going to be totally researched. I'm going to know everything there is to know about it, as much as I can find out. But maybe other members of the team will be left in the dark, especially the psychic. The psychic will never be told anything, not even the name of the place that they're going. They'll be shut in the back of a van, and they won't know what direction they're going in. I worked, for instance, with Amy Allen, who's pretty famous now for her work on the Dead Files. Amy's a good friend. I've worked with her on quite a number of very compelling cases around the country. And you always keep your psychic in the dark. You never let them know. And some of the team members, I don't let know, but at least one other team member and I will be fully versed on the history of the site, so that we can possibly notice when something untoward is happening and warn everybody. For instance, you have to have somebody that's been fully in the know. So I prefer to be that person, because I tend to do digging anyway, so I might as well be the one digging and getting all the background on the case and the history of the building, for instance, or site, and find out if other people have been there and what they found. And I don't want to telegraph that, somehow to the psychic, but which could could happen. And I think I've worked with psychics that have done that before. They've picked up on subtle clues that the team members are giving off for them to kind of give them a little forewarning. I've worked with only one or two people that I felt were not as talented as, let's say, someone like an Amy Allen, who was proven to me that she is very, very sensitive and psychic. We've had her turn around and go, "Do you hear that? Do you hear that?" And we're looking at each other going, "No, we don't hear anything." What? She goes, "I just heard kids laughing." And then when we got back to the studio and we're going through the tapes in the EVP recordings, right before she said, we synced up all the audio, and right before she said, "Did you hear that? Did you hear that?" We got EVPs of kids laughing. So there's no way you can fake that.
Right.
So, Amy's a real deal. I really have a ton of respect and admiration for her.
Yeah, she. I've seen the Dead Files, and I've seen programs that she was on before that, and
Right.
she was always very impressive to me
Yeah.
with her skills and her abilities.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to work with some very, very talented psychics on haunted site investigations. I got into the haunted site thing. I really wasn't that interested in it. I thought it was kind of dumb, really. I thought people were just scaring themselves, and so I was working for a video company, and the owner of the company was really into to haunted site investigating, and so I would be hired as a cameraman or audio guy, or the evidence chain, the holder of the evidence chain, that sort of thing. And after about the second or third place that we went, I changed my tune. There's definitely something to this. This isn't all just things that go bump in the night and just people freaking themselves out. I've seen some things and experienced some things that. Well, even one time I got scared. I mean, that's the only time I've ever been scared doing investigations in 30 years. And I went to one place that I was in fear of my physical well-being.
Yeah, that's never good.
No, it wasn't. It was not a good experience. And 3 of the 4 people that were down in the basement of the Atchison house there were sick. 2 of them for 2 weeks, 1 for a week, and then me and the other guy, Mike Esposito, nothing phases him, and I got masked pretty good for about 20 minutes. I had to go lay down, but after that I was fine. But the other 3 people, Amy included, she was sick as a dog for 2 weeks after it. So.
Wow. So now, you say that's your scariest investigation. I would think going to Skinwalker Ranch would be like right up there at the top.
No. Beautiful day. It's 104 degrees. Terry was just, like an open book. It all came just burbling out of him. I looked around the place and thought, man, this is such a beautiful, beautiful ranch. It's just hard to believe that all this weird stuff's going on here. And then he showed me the tops of the cottonwood trees that had been sheared off by an object coming through a portal in the air. And he said, the guy, usually they float through, but they must have had a rookie driver this time because he came shooting through, and I saw him just knock the tops of all my 60-foot cottonwood trees off. And sure enough, there were all the branches on the ground. I mean, I saw the evidence. There's no way somebody could have gotten up to the top there and done that. And even if they could, why? How could they break the tops of the trees and not cut them? So that was pretty interesting. And then seeing the big landing marks on the ground, punched into hard bend, like 3 or 4 inches, 9 tons worth of pressure it would take to make the marks, the 14-inch marks on the ground. That was pretty interesting, but I never felt any fear at all. I was excited. I was like, wow, this could be the coolest case I ever was exposed to, which it turned out to be. And then I got totally locked out of it by Bigelow. When my name came up, he's just a journalist, So what can you do?
Now, what do you think was going on there at the Skinwatch? Do you think, because I researched.
There's no one size fits all answer.
Yeah.
There's multiple things going on there.
Because I do dogman investigations here in Michigan, and everybody always says dogman and skinwalkers are the same thing, and I kind of argue that point.
No,
But
no.
what do you think the skinwalkers are?
I know what skinwalkers are. I don't think skinwalkers are it's a branch of very black Navajo magic, the witchery way. There's 3 types of Navajo magic. Skinwalkers are the most powerful and the darkest of the sorcery in the Dene tradition, and they go through a very lengthy apprenticeship and training, and then at the end, their final test basically is to kill a family member who they're closest to, and then they bring them back and they have a meal with the other skinwalkers, and that's the initiation. And it's the real deal. I talked to too many law enforcement officials and tribal officials, and heard what they had to say about the subject. I'm thoroughly convinced that there still are people that have the abilities said to exist by the old school adepts. There's skinwalkers that run around saying they're skinwalkers, but they aren't. They're just there to get people's money and do bad things to people for them. They're like magical mercenaries, magical hitmen, and they have various ways of impinging on a person's health and well-being, and they do have the ability to don the skin of an animal and become that animal. I know it sounds totally fantastic and like some sort of bad Hollywood movie, but there have been stories like Stanley Milford and the Navajo Rangers have told stories about skinwalkers. I've made quite a number of inroads into living in Arizona for 14 years. I befriended some Hopi. I befriended a Zuni elder, and got to know quite a number of Navajo. And you know, when you talk to them, and the guy makes a report that there's an oversized, weird coyote whose eyes don't light up in the dark that's been killing his sheep, and then he called them to the rangers to come out, and he shot the thing in the belly, and it was able to crawl away in the dark. And so the rangers came, and then they hung out until it was just enough light so that they could track it really easily. And so they started following the tracks, and then they got to a point off into the Chico, into the desert, where the coyote tracks ended, and there were human tracks that were crawling along. And then they found the skinwalker shot in the gut. He bled out. He was naked with a deer hide on him, and or a coyote hide on. I had another case of a skinwalker was hit by a car, and they thought they'd hit a deer, and when they were convinced it was a deer that bounded across the road, and when they stopped and looked at it, it was a guy dressed with a deer skin. So, for your listeners, take it with a grain of salt, but I'll tell you, Nichelle Dolce are real in the minds of the Dene people, the Navajos and Apache. And there are no skinwalkers up in the Uinta Basin. The Ute Indians don't have the skinwalker tradition as one of their boogeymen, really. Supposedly, the skinwalker that's haunting them is their Navajo skinwalker. The Utes helped the U.S. Army capture all the Navajo. They were scouts for the Army, and that's why they got into they didn't get along with the Navajo because they helped the white guys out. And so supposedly they're all paranoid and say that they got cursed and with some skinwalker is haunting them up there. That name really shouldn't have been applied to that ranch. It just sounded good, so they used it.
So I'm assuming some of this research went into your books that you've written. Can you tell me more
Oh,
about
well, there's
your books?
there's a whole chapter in my book on the tricksters. Yeah, Stalking the Tricksters has a whole chapter on skinwalkers and other types of Native American sorcery, and I go into a lot of detail.
Now, so how many books have you written?
7.
Wow, 7. Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about each one of them so that my listeners?
Well, yeah, no, 2 have not been published.
Okay.
The other 5, the first 2 of the other 5 are out of print. You can get used copies on Amazon. Mysterious Valley was my first book that I wrote in '93, and then my second book was Enter the Valley, which is kind of a continuation of the first book, which I wrote in '96 and '97. And then Secrets of the Mysterious Valley was the story of writing the first 2 books. I pulled out all my best cases and then put information on what it's like to go around investigating all this stuff. That's a pretty big book. That's almost 500 pages. And then my third book is, or the fourth book rather, is Stalking the Tricksters, which looks at tricksters around the world and attempts to tie all paranormal phenomena up into a nice, neat little bundle. And I proposed a unified field theory that connects the paranormal to itself. Like, what's the commonality between hauntings and spook lights, or hauntings and UFO sightings, or abductions and cattle mutilations. And I came up with the idea that the trickster is always present in any of these types of events. So I wrote a whole book about the tricksters. And then my last book was the Bible for anyone that's interested in the cattle mutilation phenomenon. I took man's exalted, sacred man's sacred relationship with cattle that goes back 30,000 years, and then go forward through time until the present day when we have the cattle mutilation phenomenon. And then in the middle of the book is literally a case history of the phenomenon, broken up by week, by month, and by year. That's almost 700 pages. 600 something pages. It's a big book.
Yeah, it was a very interesting read. Just the when you play it out in your mind, it's very graphic. Seeing these images of the cattle's mutilations. What is your not to give away the whole book, but what is your ideas behind what was causing it?
Well, again, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. I think there's multiple groups involved with their own, each has their own agenda, and they bounce their agendas off the other agendas to try to hide what they're doing and try to put the blame on one of the other groups. It's very complicated. I think that the majority of them were done by humans looking possibly for evidence of mad cow disease in the food chain. I think that's one of the primary motivators. But there are high-strength cases that have been going on probably for, well, at least for hundreds of years, possibly even thousands of years. There are cases that are real head-scratchers that we can't really figure out, what their motivation is. But it seems like the other groups know about that agenda and are looking either for the same thing or for something similar to what the high-strange cases are looking for. It seems to be an experimentation. It seems that there's something is being looked for in the soft tissue organs of these animals. And I go to great lengths to look at every theory and see if there's validity to all these various theories that have been proposed over the years. And there's a certain amount of evidence to support them all. But then there's a ton of evidence to refute it. So it's a real Gordian knot that I've attempted to unravel. And my next book, which I'm working on right now, the co-author is looking at all the data that I presented in Stalking the Herd. We're going to analyze all that data in the next book and really crunch the numbers look for commonalities, look for patterns, and then voice possible agendas of what could be behind it.
So now my last question for the interview is going to be if people are interested in getting your books, or do you do any of the UFO conferences or anything like that? What how can people find out more about your research, and do you leave it out there for people to contact you if they've had sightings, or
Sure.
do you contact them?
Yes. Well, I have my website, OurStrangePlanet.com, O-U-R, Strange Planet. It's a strange planet. It's OurStrangePlanet.com. I'll be speaking at I'll have a table at the MUFON conference in Irvine in the end of July. I'll be presenting to the state directors and the investigators, information about the UFODAP program. And then I'll be speaking in September at the International UFO Congress. I'll be talking about UFODAP and how to actually start your own data acquisition project in your own neck of the woods. If you think that there's activity around your area, it would sure be nice to capture it with scientific equipment. That's the goal of the project, to get as many of these setups out there and generating data as we can. And of course, they're all going to be connected over the internet, so it's going to be a huge net of investigative setups. And if you want to be part of the solution, that would be one way. Turn your TVs off, turn your phones off, and get out, get your sleeves rolled up, and put up a UFODAP system and get ready to rock.
Awesome. Well, Chris, I want to thank you for coming on to the show today, and it's been a fascinating talk, and thank you very much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you.